Hey, what is poppin', guys? So in December, me and a very special YouTuber went over a versus battle between two of the most popular Bleach characters, that being Byakuya Kuchiki and Kenpachi Zaraki. And at the end of the video, we basically asked if people wanted to see more scenarios. And one of those that people were really interested in was Kisuke Urahara against Ulquiorra when they went to the world of the living. We're basically gonna go over like what their abilities are, and then like the narrative of, which character would logically be above the other, and we'll basically go from there. And that very special individual is none other than the man who came from the wombat pouch, that being Clyde Kuraido. Say what's up, buddy-o.
Thank you for having me on again, Chuck. We're here with another collab, and basically we handled Kenpachi versus Byakuya pretty well after rewatching it. I think we did a pretty good job of that video, so today we wanted to make a video which basically talks about what would have actually happened if Ulquiorra and Yammy did actually throw hands with Yoruichi and Urahara, because it's pretty interesting to think about when you actually read what Ulquiorra said to Urahara and Yoruichi. He said something along the lines of, you know what would happen if we were to fight right now. Now, we obviously know that he's talking to them in regards to the fact that they have injured people around them, but also he does seem awfully confident in fighting Urahara and Yoruichi and isn't actually scared of them. And then later on, we even see that Yoruichi is quite surprised at how strong those Espada actually are, and is quite heavily damaged just from landing blows on Yammy. So we decided this would be a pretty cool topic to talk about. Now, we do want to be really specific with this too. We are only talking about Urahara and these characters before the time skip, so anything that they really did in the war is not actually going to be relevant to this video, because the actual scaling itself becomes very different and complicated once you factor in the time skip. So just to be clear at the start, when they all faced off at the very start of the Urahara arc. Yeah, so it's actually really interesting to think about Yammy at that point of the story, because Ulquiorra really specifies that Yammy has neither mastered Pesquisa, so he was blitzed by Ichigo and cut when he shouldn't have been at that stage. Like, he should have actually been able to block that attack with his spiritual pressure, but he couldn't because he couldn't read Ichigo's power. And then also, it's really interesting to think about this. So Yoruichi actually states during the Soul Society arc, when she actually appears in her Shinigami form rather than the cat form, that she could only do a few flash steps because she was actually out of her prime after not fighting for such a long time. That's a valid thing to bring up, but the problem that sort of comes up when it comes to the other side of the argument is that Yammy also wasn't at his peak at all whatsoever when he faced off against Yoruichi. We know this because later on during the actual Hueco Mundo invasion, when all of the Shinigami go to Hueco Mundo and Chad fights Yammy and Renji is also there and Rukia, Chad makes a note that he is actually multiple times bigger than before. And we know this is actually important because Yammy has to store a lot of spiritual pressure to be able to perform an actual release, because his release is much different than all of the other Espada. He's actually quite special, and yeah, the point I'm making here is that neither of the characters at that point in the story were at their peaks, which means if you want to bring up the Yoruichi point, like, oh, well, she wasn't really at full power, she was protecting Orihime, she was in a bad position right there. The fact of the matter is, Yammy also wasn't at his peak either, and Yoruichi is seen injured just from connecting blows with Yammy without even taking damage. The data books also say that one of his Ceres is powerful enough to potentially kill her, which is cool. Like, again, she's not really in a position to defend herself well, but the fact that he can use an attack that could kill her is pretty crazy. Later on, when Yoruichi and Urahara face off against Eisen, Yoruichi actually appears with anti-hero armor, which was obviously made with the idea of, well, that Yammy guy's hero was pretty damn strong, and yeah, I kinda injured myself, I don't want to do that again. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells me that, yeah, the Espada that they ran into were a pretty big deal even back then at the very start of the arc, and when they were only in their base forms. Pretty crazy, and pretty impressive for Yammy.
So one of the biggest debates in the community is regarding the power of the Espada. Now, if you look at it from a surface level, you'll be like, oh, Aizen ranked them, and Stark is number 1, so he's obviously the strongest one. At best, you can argue that he is the strongest in base overall, but when you analyze the narrative and the data books, and obviously the fights that take place in the story, it's more so like Yammy is the strongest one, and Ulquiorra is a close second. So for example, we do know that Yammy is literally 0. He has 2 releases. He fought against goddamn Kenpachi and Byakuya at the same time, and he forced them to, well, I wouldn't say necessarily force them, but he did give him a somewhat difficult battle. Kenpachi does say he was bored, but the guides do imply that he was actually, getting beat up a bit, but he was obviously injured from fighting Noitora. And then with Ulquiorra, there's this really great amount of trust that Aizen holds in him, because he actually sent him out on a lot more missions, and with the other Espada, he entrusted him with getting Orihime, because he wanted to analyze her power. And also when he left to go fight in the fake Karakura town, he was like, okay, Ulquiorra, I'll leave this to you, you know what to do, just safeguard the castle, all that. And then, once the war progresses, we see, Baragon getting defeated by his own power, which was stupid. And then, we have Stark getting defeated, and, Harabel not performing as good as, Aizen thought, even though she was fighting, 4 people, 3 or 4 people at the same time. So, but yeah, when he saw them all get defeated, he was like, you guys are pretty disappointing. But then with Ulquiorra, he doesn't really seem to be upset with him. I mean, he's like, oh, it's pretty interesting, the power that Ichigo showed against him, the whole Vasto Lorde. And we do know that he had been analyzing it for, several years.
So it's really weird when it comes to the anime and manga, because we don't know exactly if Aizen actually seen the battle, because in the anime it's shown that he has this screen where he can watch all the battles, and then when he talks to Ichigo in the manga, he actually references the second release form, and he has a visual representation of it. But also it might be telling the audience hey, you guys remember this moment, this is what Aizen's talking about. But basically the point here that I'm making is, it's interesting when Aizen talks about that battle, because when he talks about Haribel and Stark and all of the Espada that are in Karakura Town, he's really disappointed with how they performed. He literally says he's disappointed, and then he just slashes Haribel. If they were impressive, he probably would have still had Haribel with him. I mean, why not? He brought Gin with him. Wouldn't you still want to have a pretty strong Espada next to you helping you out, considering how loyal she was? And wouldn't you want to help out Baragon and Stark? He just didn't care. Even Stark looks at him and he's he sort of realized, he's I don't think this guy even gives a shit. It was obvious there. But there's a few things to think about. So, one, Aizen's impressed by the power that Ichigo attained in that battle, being the Vasto Lorde form, which is the form that he was expecting to fight Ichigo with. He thought Ichigo would whip that out against him. And in Everything But the Rain, basically, you get to see the Vasto Lorde form, but it's in a much weaker state, and Aizen's really curious about how it's going to turn out. It ends up being an Ichigo after his mother gives birth to him, so on and so forth. And anyway, Aizen's fascinated by this power, but when it comes to the other Espada, he's pretty disappointed, right? Now, there is a lot of emphasis on Espada like Yammy and Ulquiorra being the strongest due to a lot of things like the narrative, the data books, and so on. It's obvious that although Stark has number 1, he's kind of just a placeholder number, because Yammy turns out to be the secret number 0. Ulquiorra has a hidden release form, which, interestingly, if Aizen doesn't actually know about that form, like Ulquiorra said, that means that the form is much stronger than we believe, because you could interpret it as, Aizen put Ulquiorra as number 4, as a number which symbolizes a lot of things in Japan, which was obviously Kubo's doing, not Aizen's, but also he put that there as a fake number. Meanwhile, he had a secret release form. He trusts him more than any other Espada. He sends him on more missions than any other Espada. The actual strongest Espada, being Yammy, is actually stated to only follow Ulquiorra because he respects his strength. Just more and more crazy evidence that Ulquiorra is in fact the strongest. And then Ulquiorra fights against the Vasto Lorde, which, I mean, it doesn't really need to be said, but the Vasto Lorde is pretty damn strong, and he doesn't do too bad against it. Yes, he does get defeated, but interestingly enough, when it comes to Ulquiorra's durability, he actually says to the Vasto Lorde, he says, finish me off, and he lets his guard down. He takes a Cero to the face, survives it. Now, although his internal organs get destroyed to the point where he can't regenerate them, the fact of the matter is, he did have the durability to be able to then survive the attack and died later on, but he still walked around for a while and was sort of there. That's a pretty good feat considering he didn't even really defend the attack. So basically, if you want to say Stark's still the strongest, knock yourself out. I don't really care, but the truth of the matter is Aizen's impressed by all of the stuff to do with Ulquiorra and Yammy, and leaves, Hueco Mundo all under Ulquiorra's responsibility, and then leaves Yammy in Hueco Mundo with his secret release forms, and he's secretly the strongest one. It's who was he planning to have them fight? People like Kenpachi, Byakuya, and Urahara. That's why he trapped them all in Hueco Mundo. The data books do say that, Aizen wanted to reach immortality before fighting Kenpachi because he knew the potential of Kenpachi's power. Just more and more evidence that, leaving the strongest Espada in Hueco Mundo makes sense because, yeah, there were some pretty strong people in there, and There you go. Just interesting little facts about Ulquiorra.
And there are some pretty good instances in the whole battle with Vasto, Lorde, Ichigo that could imply that Ulquiorra's second release is pretty abnormal in comparison to like a typical release, because we know that Espada have access to the Cero, then the Gran Rey Cero, which is stronger than that. And then this fool literally has another Cero stronger than that called Cero Oscuras, which is pretty much like his own special thing. And then he has the Lanza de Relámpago, which is even stronger than that. And I think we should go over like the whole battle between him and Ichigo, not only within like the anime, but also within Hellverse movie, because according to Kubo, he does imply that that is like how he wanted the battle to really go, or that is how he visualized it to be, because he might have been under a rush when he was writing it at the time.
Kubo said that during the Hellverse representation of Ichigo versus Ulquiorra, that basically this is the version of the fight which he wanted to actually show. Like it's the more canon one in his brain. If you want to discard that comment, let's say for a second that that quote never happened by Kubo. Well, the Hellverse movie is really handy for this debate because basically you have characters like Yamamoto who states that the Vasto Lorde could perform a feat which even he thought was impossible, which was cutting the chains of hell. And then also, with this scaling, it also helps out Ulquiorra because, again, if Eisen doesn't know about his second release form, and Ulquiorra is scaling to a character that, you know, has power that surprises Yamamoto, and Ichigo thinks it might destroy the world when he talks to Orihime. This is pretty cool when it comes to Ulquiorra because that means that him even being able to tag the Vasto Lorde or shoot attacks at the Vasto Lorde which can cancel out its Ceros and vice versa, that's really good scaling for Ulquiorra because then that puts Ulquiorra in a position where, well, maybe he is at that sort of ballpark of power where, you know, if it was just, you know, base Shikai Eisen, right, without Kyokusui Getsu, just for the sake of a hypothetical battle, then maybe like this Ulquiorra in his second release form would actually be a threat, and in that same level of power. Basically, it's said that all Espada have to follow two rules. Espada rank 4 and higher can't release below the canopy of Los Noches, or they might accidentally destroy Los Noches. That's a really cool feat. Now, the other rule is that all Espada are not allowed to discharge Gran Rey Cero below the canopy of Los Noches. What this shows me is that the actual multiplier of the Gran Rey Cero is over 10 times, because if you take Xylal Aropero Grants, right, as an example, one of the weakest Espada, if he uses Gran Rey Cero, that means that he can put himself on the same level of power as the top 4 Espada. Now, listen to what I'm saying here. I'm not saying he could beat them in a fight or even battle them. It's more so he's able to achieve a level of power that they can reach by just transforming, showing me that his level of attack potency is over 10 times, because by them releasing they can destroy Los Noches, but if he was to use that Cero, he might destroy Los Noches too, and he's banned from doing so. We actually seen this too, because Grimmjow used a Gran Rey Cero against Ichigo, and Harley-Bell and all of her Fruction were basically just like, why the hell did he use that? Like, he's not supposed to do that, and it distorted the atmosphere below the canopy of Los Noches, so that's pretty crazy too. You could also say, well, why didn't it destroy Los Noches? You know, that's obviously an inconsistent statement. Well, Ichigo actually blocked the attack, so he probably absorbed most of the power when it was actually connecting, so that's obviously why. But even still, it distorted the atmosphere, so it shows you the level of power that those Ceros could potentially have. Now, well, basically, it just shows you the level of power that those Ceros could potentially have in the multiplier. And then also, what's cool is, if Ulquiorra goes into his second release form, he gets a 100 times increase in power, potentially more, but we'll say 100 just to keep it as simple as possible. He then uses a Gran Rey Cero. He can then multiply that 100 times power by 10 times, right, when he fires the Cero. And then he also has Cero Oscuras, which, you know, that multiplier is, it's not really relevant to what I'm going to say, but again, another increase in power. And then the Lanza de Relámpago, which he whips out after his Cero Oscuras don't work because they keep getting cancelled by the Vasto Lorde Ceros. He's basically just like, yo, catch this, and he throws this spear, and it's literally like firing a nuclear bomb, which he can just whip out like endlessly. Even Uryu is like, what? He can fire that multiple times? That's insane. So, yeah, when it comes to Ulquiorra's attack potency, you're looking at a guy who can, in second release, be over 100 times stronger than his base, and then his own attacks that he can pull out can multiply his potency by anywhere from 10 to like 50 times, but we'll say 10 to 20 to be fair, because we don't want to go too overboard, but this man's ridiculous. Like, if he uses his Lanzador Lampago, his potency, if it's, 20 times 100, that's 2,000. Like, he's pretty strong, I'm just saying, he's pretty strong.
It's pretty evident that it would be stronger than, like, Cero Oscuras because, like, I mean, he literally said it was pretty difficult to, like, maintain, Like, and he tells Ichigo, like, please stay still, like, I haven't, really, like, fully mastered this ability, so... What we're trying to detail here is that Ulquiorra, in comparison to the other Espada, except for Yammy at least, he is just basically on a whole other level to them, and this is really important because, Kisuke was already... finding it difficult somewhat to deal with, a much weaker Yammy at the time. But obviously, we are going to go over how Kisuke did against Aizen later on in the arc. One of the biggest things that Kisuke Urahara has is that he is a really good strategist. Like, he has, like, backup plans for backup plans. He's, trying to analyze, and he'll try to strategize, like, on the get-go. But when he fights off against Yammy, he actually showcases two very important abilities, or I guess you could say like a wild card, right? So one of those is that if he analyzes an attack, he can basically like study like the pattern of the person's muscles when they fire it, and also the reishi or spiritual pressure composition. And he does say that he does have difficulty with this, but if he is able to do so, he can, counter that attack with his own. And another one is that he is basically like fast enough that he was able to just catch, Yammy completely off guard, and he was able to actually use a Gigai, or like a, portable soul, to basically make Yammy think that he actually killed him then and there, but Kisuke's like, nah bro, like it was a decoy. And he does use this against Aizen as well. And due to being, like, one of the most skilled characters in the series, he can trap Kidos within Kidos, and, he can also seal off the vents of a person's wrist to destabilize their spiritual pressure, which would basically, like, make that character's own power work against them, which he did use against Aizen. And when he faced off against Aizen, he actually tells him, like, oh, you are pretty much, like, one of the only people that I ever thought was, smarter than me, And he does say that once he got the Hogyoku that, he transcended him, which is pretty obvious. But when he fights off against Urahara, he's obviously being casual. He literally says that he doesn't really have a reason to guard against their attacks. But he does say in one instance, like when Urahara traps like a bunch of Kidos and he spams him, he does say at the end that if, he let like those attacks hit him without the Hogyoku, he might have been donezo then and there. And there is like this narrative implication that Isshin, Yoruichi, and Kisuke are like, I guess like the best last-ditch effort to defeat Aizen, and it seems that they are stronger than the vast majority of the captains as well. As I said, yeah, Aizen was being casual, and he was letting attacks hit him, but we do see that Isshin's Getsuga Tensho was actually able to cut through that Chrysalis Aizen, and then all the other captains, although yes, most of them were exhausted from fighting, the Espada and stuff like that, they really couldn't land a single hit on him, pretty much, And we see these three are able to hold their own much better against this much stronger Aizen.
There is something pretty cool. So at the start of that arc, Aizen sends Yammy and Ulquiorra to the world of the living to go and analyze Ichigo's power. And he does actually warn them that there's actually 3 individuals in the world of the living, which might give them a genuine fight, and they should be wary of them. And these 3 are obviously Yoruichi, Urahara, and Isshin. Now, how he found out that Isshin got his powers back, pretty weird. But also, it wouldn't be sort of like out of Aizen's, realm to be able to figure something like that out. Like, it's not crazy. Like, he probably even knew that Ishin's powers would return eventually when the Hollow was passed on to Ichigo, so that's not that crazy. But the narrative of the story shows that when those 3 end up facing off against Aizen later on, it was in fact those 3, which were the 3 that he mentioned. So that's pretty cool, because he's basically saying like, yo, I'm gonna send you 2 out there to go deal with seeing how strong Ichigo is. Just go and check on him for me. That'd be cool. But just be careful of those 3, they're pretty strong. So that's cool, because he's not even like that scared that they might get killed. He's more just saying like, just be wary of those guys. So that's pretty interesting to me, because it shows me that those 2 Espada are in the same sort of realm of power in regards to, well, Aizen's given them like multiple secret release forms and all this huge power with the Hogyoku. Like, he's confident that like, maybe not necessarily that they would just go in there and just like, one-shot them and win, but more like he knows that they actually could fight with them. And the story does show us that that's the case, because again, Ulquiorra makes the cocky comment towards Yoruichi and Urahara, like, yo, you guys know what would happen if we fought. And then also, the next day, Yoruichi's like, yo, these guys are stronger than we thought. So, just to mention all this stuff again, there's just so much narrative evidence that it's actually crazy when it comes to how strong Ulquiorra and Yammy actually are.
Urahara's like best attributes isn't like his raw power or, you know, his speed, you know, I mean, he is pretty fast, but it is more so of his intelligence, you know, how he can strategize and he can try to catch an opponent off guard, try to use their own power against them. And one thing I want to bring up as well is that what I said earlier is that he can basically try to seal off the vents that, you know, a Soul Reaper has, which is where like their reishi or spiritual pressure flows from. And he would have theoretically tried to use that to have Aizen's own power kill him. Now, this doesn't mean that Kisuke's own power can do that, you know, it's more so him manipulating someone's power to do that against them. So, you can think of it, if you've read like the Marvel comics, like Doctor Strange, you know, he's fought against characters that are much stronger than him, but with his spells and his abilities, he can basically use their own power against
I've come to bargain.
You know, yeah, he can, yeah, so with Doctor Strange, like, he can try to use their own power against them, so it's a similar thing right there. But yeah, like, I think you can go over like the specifics of those Kido, because yeah, he's like a master at that, and he, you know, he should like pretty much know all of them.
Yeah, so I'd like to specify on a lot of the scaling at that part of the arc too, to give you guys perspective on how strong Urahara should be at that point in the story. So there's a couple of interesting things. So the Kido that Chuck mentioned that he uses, where he places it on the wrists of Aizen to make his... It basically does this. So it traps the spiritual pressure in your body, and then it starts to like rotate around your body, and it expands and starts to power up until you basically explode from the inside. So he could do that to pretty much anybody if he was to land it correctly. You know, things like speed and getting punched in the face are obviously going to be in the way of that working on anybody. But if, say, Yamamoto was standing still and he didn't defend himself and he did that to Yamamoto, he could use that attack on Yamamoto and it would work. So it's a very useful ability. But basically, Aizen says if it wasn't for the Hogyoku and him being able to transform, he pretty much would have been defeated right there and then. So if that was done against Shikai Aizen, it would have been GG. Now, in Aizen's battle with all of them, he's not even using the Kyoka Soigetsu, which is why that when they use like tag team attacks, they're able to basically have success. And you know, Urahara even says, it's like, yeah, you're fighting like pretty unusual. Like you would have normally never attacked me after like the first attack didn't work. Like you're fighting out of character pretty much. And then Aizen's like, you know, I have no need to guard myself and I'm this much stronger than you guys. So what happens is, basically, when he's in his Silver Surfer form, Isshin, Urahara, and Yoruichi all try to attack him at once. You know, they have some success here and there with some combination attacks, but the problem becomes that Isshin basically says, it feels like when I swing at him, he's not even there. Only someone on the same level of power would be able to actually perceive his real power. And that's basically telling us as an audience that even though they're having this, you know, what looks to be success, they're not even doing anything well against Aizen, because what happens is that Aizen says pretty much, alright, I'm sick of dicking around, I'm going to actually show you how strong I am, and he one-shots all of them, like, in singular attacks, like, they're all just done. He then transforms again, and then he's like, alright, Geen, let's go, we're gonna go to the real Karakura town, and then that's it. It kind of sucks when it comes to Urahara's position here in the battle, because all the success that he actually did have against this, you know, Hogyoku Aizen, it wasn't even successful. It was just Aizen messing around with all of them too. So to scale Urahara to say, you know, Silver Surfer Aizen and that makes him transcendent or, you know, blah blah blah, whatever, because it took 3 of them to even land blows, and even then, he wasn't being serious. So it's not a very good feat for them at that stage.
So although we didn't see Kisuke use like his Bankai like during that arc, and you know, he was basically keeping it like a secret, like even the Quincy's were like, what the hell does this dude like have, you know? And obviously like it would be like his Bankai at that point in time, like we're not gonna use like, you know, the power that he gained during the war arc, you know, that would be dumb. But this Bankai allows him to stitch himself, you know, like repair any wounds, and he can also like try to manipulate like a person's limbs like he did to Askin. This Bankai works on improving any mistakes and, you know, making himself stronger. Now with the whole general Bankai multiplier, you know, 5 to 10 times. So, you know, this would definitely give him, a decent chance, you know, from the looks of it already.
He can pretty much like heal his wounds, and then also what happens is like, let's say he gets like his arm cut, you know, really badly, or it's like removed or whatever. Let's say it gets healed back, but then he can like punch like way harder than before, so he can amplify his power and things like that, which when you think about it, his Bankai is kind of weird for his character, but still, it's a very weird Bankai, and even the Quincy's were all just like, like, what the hell's that? Like, we don't even know anything about the Bankai, like what Chuck said. But as for, like, what he could do, so, in the actual battle itself, you've got to factor in a lot of things. So, you've got, like, Urahara being a threat to Aizen, where now that he's finally fused with the Hogyoku, he believes that he's surpassed Urahara in every conceivable way. Now, I would be interested to see what the raw translation of that statement was, because it's really interesting, because he basically says two contradicting statements. So Aizen says, my power, which was unmatched in the Soul Society, right? But then he says, I've now surpassed you, Urahara, as I am right now. So it's like, it's a little weird, because it's like, does he mean intelligence? Does he mean it in sort of a hateful way, where he's talking in a very sort of like, it's obviously a very dislikable way. Like, he obviously doesn't have a lot of like towards Urahara, other than respecting his intelligence, because even at the end of the series, he's like, how could you submit yourself to something like that? A man of your intelligence, it's disgusting, like, he's really pissed off in that regard. So maybe he's saying it in some sort of weird, jealous sort of tone, where he's just like, I've now surpassed you in every way, because he knows how smart Urahara is. Or he means strength. If he means strength, it makes things really weird, because it's like, wait, Urahara is like in that same level of like, slashing and speed power as Yamamoto, because because Aizen says like he was unsure if he could beat Yamamoto, but he's like equating Urahara to that same level. I personally believe it means like intelligence and also like every other sort of like facet when it comes to Urahara, but if it's power, it's very hard to give Ulquiorra a bit of a chance here. But again, that depends on how you scale Ulquiorra, because of the Halver stuff and Yamamoto's quotes, and then, how strong is the second release form if Aizen doesn't know about it, or maybe the Vasto Lorde is stronger than Yamamoto and stuff. It's really complicated, but to go back to what I was going to say, so if we include all these things, like, his Bankai, all the Kitos and so on, he could heal himself plenty of times, make himself way stronger. He could use lots of Kitos to basically create diversions. He could use the Gigai to maybe dodge an attack or two. I doubt it would work more than once though, just because Ulquiorra is much smarter than Yammy is. So I could see him catching on quickly, and he's also quite intelligent too. So he would keep an eye on that. He also is like much faster than Yammy is, and then if he's in his second release form, he could also heal himself from certain wounds. If that like wrist Keto was planted on Ulquiorra's wrist, he would explode from the inside and die, because he wouldn't have the Hogyoku to save him. I think it's pretty much GG from there, but the risk of actually getting near Ulquiorra and using that is really difficult. But I would say, yeah, it's weird, because it's like, he should have the speed advantage, he should have the slashing advantage, like with raw power, he should have the explosive advantage, because the Lanzador Lampago seems to be bigger and more impressive than anything Urahara's done in terms of just raw DC. So Urahara needs to somehow maybe use the Gigai, get near Ulquiorra, touch his wrist real quickly without getting his head like backhanded off of his shoulders from the swiping strength. Or, I don't know, he uses his Bankai to like amp his own strength so he can quickly get near him really fast, or he uses like a heap of Kitos, like that scene where he's standing in midair and he's like waving his wand around like he's a Harry Potter character, and he's like, take that Eisen, Abracadabra, like, he's like whipping out this essay long Kito, and it's pretty powerful. But it all depends, from my perspective, with my final take on this, how you interpret the Aizen quote, because if Aizen actually does believe that Urahara is in fact, in that same level of power as he is when he's just in, Shikai, pre-getting the Hogyoku and stuff, that's hard to say that Ulquiorra would have a chance based on the statement made about the Espada, where Aizen is above all of the Espada. But if the second release is actually a secret form that even Aizen doesn't know about, or that statement doesn't even apply to, what Gin said about him being above, all of the Espada, because, even Gin doesn't know about it, but Aizen does, then it's really weird. Then it becomes really confusing on how you interpret it, Is it a secret form? Does Aizen know? Is Aizen saying that the Vasto Lorde, considering he complemented its power and that's the thing he was expecting to fight, does that mean that Ulquiorra and the Vasto Lorde are like threats to him in his Shikai form? Are they above Urahara? Like, again, my final take, I think that Ulquiorra wins in his second release form because of the amount of destruction he can cause and his speed and how difficult he would be to even like land a Keto on. But I also think that if you give every benefit of the doubt, the real, the most ideal situation for Urahara, where he can take full advantage of using diversions with the Gigais, different Ketos, land seals on him, use multiple different combinations of Ketos, mix his Bankai in there, so on and so forth. And then the Eisen statement, he could definitely win, but I generally do drift towards Ulquiorra in this battle, and I think that second release Ulquiorra with the multiplier from the Lanzador Lampago and the Cero Oscuras and the Gran Rey Cero would, if it lands, it would literally kill Urahara in a single attack. My final thoughts, and I'll let Chuck finish the video, but my final thoughts are, again, if you want to give Urahara like this really, in-depth planned out sort of fight where he has all the advantages, he can come up with like this 10-stage plan to use the Gigai, plant Kitos on Ulquiorra, land different other Kitos to bind him and blow him up from the inside or hit him from a distance and so on, use Bankai to heal himself while amping his speed and attack power and so on and so forth. And then also the Aizen quote. Sure, I guess you could say Urahara wins, but I generally, as someone who's been scaling Bleach for years, I lean towards Ulquiorra in this battle, and I do believe that he has the speed advantage, the defense advantage, the destructive capability advantage, and I personally think that Ulquiorra wins in this battle. And yeah, again, Aizen wasn't scared to send Yammy and Ulquiorra to the world of the living to potentially battle those three, and they both have secret release forms, so it's obvious that they're much stronger than the other Espada are shown to be, whereas those two have a lot of secret powers up their sleeve. So yeah, that's my final thoughts, Ulquiorra.
Ulquiorra clearly does have, the raw power advantage and speed advantage. He was able to somewhat keep up with Vasto Lorde. And, as we said, a Cero, a Gran Rey Cero are already really powerful on their own, and this fool has 2 attacks that are stronger than that. You'd basically have to argue that for Kisuke to harm him, that his abilities would have to be like Vasto Lorde level. So, I don't know about that. Unless, obviously, you use, the interpretation that Aizen meant, that he was obviously more powerful than him. Or that, basically, he hadn't surpassed him until he got to Hogyoku. And then, once Kisuke sees that, Ulquiorra is, has crazy-ass power and speed, he's gonna be very wary, and he's gonna try to use, his Gigai, decoys, to catch, an attack or two that would have heavily hurt him, if not killed him. But, Ulquiorra, he's gonna see past it, right? He's gonna be like, okay, why are you still alive, bro? He's just gonna speed blitz him before he can even put another Gigai in there, right? If you do want to, argue that, Kisuke could, maybe take a couple of attacks, repair himself, become stronger with his Bankai, Ulquiorra, he doesn't really around, He will kill if he needs to. I mean, he basically almost killed Ichigo twice. And it's actually really interesting, too, because with Aizen, he was obviously, around with them. He was being very casual. He wanted to see how the Hogyoku would help him, survive these attacks. But, Ulquiorra, if he's there to kill someone, he will do it, But yeah, guys, we were brainstorming a lot. We were analyzing stuff again from the manga and the guidebooks, We thought it was a really good battle idea. I really hope that you guys believe so as well. Please check out Clyde's channel. He does really good analyses on Bleach stuff. He has scaled the Vasto Lorde before, and, he's gone over the Ceros, the Resurrección, and stuff like that, so go check those out. Please let us know if, once again, you want to see, more versus battles, for example, an Espada free-for-all or something, or a really good one that you mentioned was, Grim Zhao against Noitora.
Yeah, videos like that would be really cool, or, I got asked this on stream, actually. What if we did a video, say, could Vasto Lorde Ichigo, solo the Espada, something like that? I mean, the answer's kind of obvious, but it's still a fun topic to talk about. Oh, here's a cool one that would get them hyped, to be honest, if they've listened this far through the video. And if you have listened this far through the video, thank you a lot.
You're a real one.
It, and please leave a like on the video. Yeah, you're a real one. But if you want to get hyped for a video that Chuck and I could do, Yamamoto versus Ichibei would be pretty fucking cool. That'd be a pretty hype topic.
Yeah, so please check out my channel as well. I don't just do Bleach, I also do Dragon Ball, SCP Universe, Marvel, Godzilla, stuff like that. So if any of that interests you, then please check me out. Once again, let us know, what kind of battles or general Bleach topics that you would like for us to cover. Once again, thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you thotties next time. Peace out.